Guys, what did your girlfriend's dad do to establish dominance? My father-in-law held some title for state boxing champ in his home state back in the day. The first time we drove over to see him, he was drunk and had a huge cut across the bridge of his nose. Apparently, he had beat the shit out of 3 20-something-year-old bullies the night before when they decided to jump him at the bar. His 70-something-year-old dad was mugged in his own home one time. My father-in-law found the guy who did it, followed him inside his house, and broke his knees and elbows. He then proceeded to beat the shit out of the guy to the point of brain damage. In his words, if they can't talk, they can't identify you. Dude is chill as hell every time I'm around, and thanks me every time I see him for getting his daughter out of the hellhole they lived in. But I know for a fact if I ever break her heart, he'd bury me. If I ever leave, it'll have to be the country. Edit. Some clarification. The muggers didn't just break in and take stuff. They waited until my wife's grandpa got home, followed him in and beat him. Put him in the hospital for like a week with broken bones and stuff. Not justifying what my father-in-law did, but just clarifying that it wasn't a total overreaction. Secondly, I'm safe. My wife is safe. My father-in-law is actually a super cool guy who has never given me trouble for a second. He will call me up out of the blue and thank me for taking care of his daughter. Story 2. I once came to a girl's house to pick her up for a date in high school, and her father answered the door and said, "Come on in." So I followed him inside, to discover the dining room table covered in disassembled firearms, and he casually sat back down, resuming oiling and assembling everything, looked up and asked, "So what are you kids up to tonight?" Story 3. Watching a movie with my girlfriend. I'm wearing my Alabama hoodie, and he saw it. We were in the basement, and she got a text from him which was a picture of a bed with all Alabama covers, pillows, etc. with the caption, "When you're ready for a sexy night with your cousin." I took the hoodie off and left in shame afterwards. Story 4. My own dad is quite a character and has done some pretty awful things to the boyfriends I brought home. First boyfriend I had at the age of 14, he put a trash can over his head and hit it, not hard, but not light, with a baseball bat over and over again. Second boyfriend, maybe around age 16, he caught us kissing and gripped him up, hung him over the edge of a balcony, and held a sword to his throat. We were at a medieval recreation event, so like an actual sword. I didn't bring home a lot of boyfriends after that. But when my now husband first met my dad, I was already pregnant by him at the age of 17. He was less than thrilled. I brought him to a family barbecue in hopes that it would be a little less intimidating, but I was so very wrong. My entire family lined up to wrestle him, with my dad being last. My cousin kept elbowing him in the eye and, in general, cheap-shotting him. My husband beat them all, so then he had to wrestle my dad. Who he beat? My dad was salty AF, but they've been like BFFs ever since. Story 5. My ex-father-in-law never did anything to really establish dominance. He shook my hand and looked at me and asked how I was doing. About 7 months later, when she was my girlfriend, we went and told him and her mother that she was pregnant, but we had already started saving extra money and had a plan for when the baby was born. This was in 2002. He once again shook my hand and thanked me for actually being a real man. Eventually, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and we moved in with him so we could keep a better eye on him. I ended up with not only another father figure like my grandfather, but a best friend. We did everything together and had a lot of fun. We'd pick on each other so much it would easily get out of hand, much to the rolling of eyes of our respective wives. He went missing a couple of times, went for a walk and got turned around, and then went for a drive and got lost. I was terrified but kept my composite and didn't stop looking until we found him. Hours later, he was a stereotypical Texan with a lot of guns, cowboy boots and hats, but with a heart the size of Texas itself to match. Fun fact, when his daughter, my wife, ended up cheating on me, which led to separation and divorce, she thought it was okay to bring the new guy around a couple of months after our daughter and I moved back near my family. He excused himself and come back with one of his shotguns and simply proclaimed, "You're not Nemesis," and the guy actually pissed himself. He told me about it later on the phone, cracking up, and he said, I'm not as far gone as they think sometimes, and he told me that I will forever be his son. Story 6. I flew overseas to meet my wife's family and ask for her hand in marriage. Made reservations at one of the fancier restaurants in town and asked him to meet me there for a talk. Should add that I was unemployed and completely broke. He pulls up in a BMW, tires screeching, and tells me to get in. I protest that we have reservations, and he says to forget about them. He takes me to a really simple coffee shop, says that I don't need to impress him with fancy shit. I tell him that I love his daughter and will always make sure that she is happy. He just looks at me for a long time, not saying anything. Finally, he says, I don't know you, but I know my daughter, and she's really smart. So many guys wanted to marry her, and she turned them down. If she sees something in you, then I'm all for it. We shook hands, and then we drove to the supermarket so I could help him haul a shit ton of groceries. My wife and I have been married for 15 years, and he's always been a complete gentleman to me. Even though I showed up in his city completely broke and jobless, lived under his roof and ate his food, he never once made me feel that he was doing me some kind of favor, or that I was anyone but a valued member of the family. And this despite the fact that he has a nasty temper and never holds his tongue with anyone else. I worked my ass off and got back on my feet, and my wife made big leaps in her career as well, and eventually we moved back to the States. He continues to be my ideal of what a real man should be. I hope to treat my own daughter's husband as well as he treated me. Story 7. My ex-GF used to know this guy, we'll call him Sam, who just came out, but his dad worked for the military and was overly macho about everything. Anyway, he was absolutely horrible to Sam once he found out, because I guess he couldn't fathom that such a macho man could have such a feminine son or something. Anyway, Sam was at culinary school abroad and was back to visit his dad, and partially to also finally come out of the proverbial closet, and invited my ex and I to a fancy dinner at his dad's. My ex was going to be late, so I went in alone and was greeted at the door by the guy's dad. He looked me up and down, grabbed my hand real tight and pulled me in real close and looked me in the eyes with absolute rage. He then started to tell me how he worked really hard to be able to do what he's done, but some people were ungrateful. He then started asking me if I've ever fought a man before, and if I had the balls to take on a man twice my size. I was so confused and actually felt really intimidated and out of place. Then his dad took me to his man cave, a room full of Navy memorabilia and a giant sailfish on the wall with a bar full of expensive whiskey. He then asked if I could drink like a man. I refused because I was driving, and he then said that I wasn't even man enough to be with his sausage muncher of a son, let alone his daughter. It was then that I realized that Sam's little sister just got a new BF, and he thought that I was him. Poor Sam. Poor little sister and her future boyfriends. That man was such an asshole. Story 8. Not with her anymore, but a previous girlfriend I had quite the father. I show up to pick her up for our first date, high school, and her dad answers the door. He is a larger man, not much taller than me, but definitely wider and more built. Then again, I'm quite scrawny at this age. Anyways, he shakes me hand and gives me that strong dad grip, then tells me lady is still getting ready, but that I should join him in his lair. So I follow him downstairs to this lair, and on the way we pass a gun rack with several shotguns. He stops and points at them and says, "You know I usually keep one loaded," then keeps moving. All right, I think. Stay cool. We enter his man cave, and it turns out he has a small boxing ring in there. He tells me that he used to train boxers back in the day, and that he could teach me a thing or two, just in case some punk tries anything. I grab gloves. He grabs those hitting mitts, not sure the name, and he teaches me how to punch. As we're doing this, he tells me that he's trained both his girls in defending themselves, and just as I swing for his glove, he dodges and whaps me over the head, sending me to the ground. He leans over and in the best dad voice ever says, "And if they can't take you down, I will." I'm on the ground for a few seconds before I get up. He starts laughing just as Lady arrives. It was a bit intimidating at first, but after the date I drove her back home and the dad invited me in for a jam session. Turns out he plays drums and wanted to test my guitar skills. Apparently, I impressed him, and we're still friends to this day, even though his daughter and I don't see each other anymore. Story 9. When I was in high school, I dated a girl who lived way out in the woods. She had always driven to my house to hang out, or we would meet somewhere. Well, one day we were going somewhere nice, and she wanted to dress up. I told her we would make it a formal date, and I would pick her up at her house. She warned me of how her dad was kind of wild, and he would be home. I told her it would be all right. I ain't no bitch. Well, the time came, and I'm pulling down the driveway, and as I get to the house, I see him. 6 foot, no shirt, mullet, cut off, acid wash shorts, dip spit all over his face. Chopping wood with an axe, I can only imagine being a modified Thor hammer. I mean, this man is splitting logs bigger than me. I get out of my car and he stops. You here to pick up my daughter? Yes, sir. She's going to be a minute. She's still getting ready. Here, help me a minute. And he tossed me a smaller, but nicer axe. So I helped him chop wood in my nice clothes for about 30 minutes. I was afraid if I said no he would chop me. We ended up bailing on the nice restaurant and eating McDonald's and banging instead. Her dad ended up being one of the nicest guys ever, but damn, that initial meeting was intimidating. He slept in his recliner every night with his shotgun in his lap. Story 10. I'll always remember my first date with one girl in high school. I drove over to pick her up, and her dad opened the door. She's still getting ready, but we'll be down in a sec. Why don't you come in and sit down? Her dad and one of his friends were hanging out in the living room, and I'm pretty sure they had been drinking for a bit. I'd never met either of them before and didn't even know the girl that well. I was 17. After basic small talk, he asks abruptly what I'd do if I died and was standing before St. Peter or whoever and was asked why I should be let into heaven. I stumbled over a bit of, well, I always helped people and lived a good life. While he and his friend shook their heads, I suddenly remembered that they were Baptists. But most importantly, I found grace in Jesus Christ, which pleased both of them immensely. Next, her dad asks what I would do if I just got a brand new Mustang, and at the gas station, he came up and asked if he could borrow it for a day. I had no idea where he was going with this, but his next line was, "Isn't that the same thing if I let you take my daughter out tonight?" I was taken aback and was close to arguing that his daughter was sentient and not a car, but thankfully she came down and interrupted that with an, "Oh, Dad, stop," and we left shortly thereafter. Story 11. I'm the girl here, but oh well. First time ever a guy was going to pick me up on a date. My dad was thrilled. He was super looking forward to intimidating them, like it was a rite of passage for him or something. He's very tall, though not bulky, and was really into Civil War reenacting at the time. So he had it all planned out that he was going to yell out, "Honey, where's the bloody rag I used to clean my saber?" with said cavalry saber all menacing in his hand. I gave the guy a heads up. Guy was a fencing instructor. So when Dad opened the door and yelled his well-rehearsed line, the guy goes, "Here, use mine," and actually threw a rag at my dad's chest. Then proceeded to take my father to his car to show off his bastard sword, claymore, etc. Guy I dated after that was a black belt. After that, I'm happy to say my dad gave up and was just content with being a passive-aggressive bully instead of any showy displays of dominance. Story 12. I was a young second lieutenant, fresh out of the academy, on my first duty assignment. There was this 50s-themed restaurant/bar in town where the wait staff wore cardigans and slacks, men, or fuzzy sweaters and poodle skirts, women. One of the girls was cute as heck, and I figured my shiny new bars of gold gave me a leg up on all the other soldier boys who probably hit on her. So I chatted her up, made her laugh with my sparkling wit, charmed her with stories of military life, and eventually gathered enough courage to ask her out. It was probably due to temporary insanity and or a sudden bout of food poisoning, but she said yes. She wrote her address on a slip of paper, told me to pick her up at 8 p.m. the following Friday for a dinner/movie date, and skated away trailing the scent of perfume and French fries behind her. Friday came around, and I looked at the address. Funny, it was for on-post housing on the base I was stationed at, first warning sign. And it was for the really nice housing that the high-ranking officers got, second warning sign. And it was a single-digit house number, DEFCON 1. Abort mission. Abort mission. Those three things put together spelled just one thing. One or both of her parents were at least full bird colonel rank, maybe even higher. I actually did think about standing her up, but then I realized the fallout from bailing on the daughter of high brass could be detrimental to my career and health. So I manned up, put on better clothes than the t-shirt and torn jeans that I had originally chosen, and drove up to the address. When I got there, I knocked on the door and waited in a posture approximating parade rest. Pretty soon, I was allowed in by a man who looked to be in his mid-50s. Chiseled jaw, tall, piercing blue eyes, short cropped hair on its way from salt and pepper to a gorgeous silver. In better shape than my skinny-ass 20-something self. He looked like a G.I. Joe doll had come to life and battled his way through plastic packaging and a battalion of Cobra shock troops to greet me at the door. He turned behind him and yelled, "Girl's name? Your date is here," and then introduced himself as Colonel. I shook the absurdly manly hand he extended my way and returned, "Lieutenant Durgle, platoon leader for my old unit at the time." He nodded, lead me into the living room, and asked if I'd like a beer. I'm not that stupid, so I said no, but an iced tea or soda if he had one would be nice. So then we made that awkward dad/date small talk that prefaces every first date pickup, made even more awkward by the fact that he might as well have been God's own archangel compared to my lowly rank. At least he was also an academy grad, so we had some common ground. Just as my date was coming down the stairs, he leaned toward me and said, "You do know she's only 16, right?" Ice water in my veins. Adrenaline surge. Fight or flight reflex. Heart beating like a hammer. Internal monologue. 16? I thought you had to be 21 to work at a place where they served alcohol.
I'm screwed.
I looked him right in the eye just as she down the stairs and said, "No, sir. I was unaware of that fact. I'll have her home by 10 p.m., sir." She heard me. If looks could kill, no Kevlar vest would have helped him, or me, at that moment. She was pissed that her dad had given away her age. She spent the rest of the extremely platonic evening complaining about how he always ruins things. We had a perfectly lovely dinner, followed by a walk around a local park. No movie, 'cause the short return time. I got her home at precisely 10 p.m., not a second early or late.